10 American cities built over abandoned ones. You're walking through a quiet city street, maybe headed to work, maybe just grabbing coffee. Everything feels normal, but just a few feet below you lies something most people never see. Entire neighborhoods, still standing. Old brick walls sealed behind new concrete. Forgotten doorways that lead to nowhere. Cities built right on top of older cities. This isn't ancient history. This is America. From Seattle to New York, places we pass every day, never realizing there's a second city right beneath our feet. These places weren't lost to time. They were buried on purpose, covered, rewritten, erased. And if you think that sounds unbelievable, wait until you hear what's really down there. Part 1, the ground that lies. Most people walk through their city without thinking twice about what's beneath them. They see the pavement, the storefronts, the traffic, and assume this is the first and only version of the place. But in dozens of American cities, that assumption is completely wrong. Because what's really under your feet might not be empty ground. It might be another city. Across the United States, entire blocks of buildings, streets, and homes have been buried, not by nature, not by war, but by design. They weren't destroyed, they weren't demolished, they were covered. And in many cases, they're still there, still intact, still buried under your feet. Sometimes, these hidden cities were the result of disaster, a flood, a fire, an earthquake. But instead of removing what was damaged, cities simply built on top of it. In other cases, they were buried out of convenience. The streets got too muddy, the sewers overflowed, so they dumped gravel and raised the ground level. And sometimes the reason was darker. Whole communities, poor, black, immigrant, were erased on purpose. Bulldozed, covered, replaced with clean sidewalks, new roads, and silence. The strangest part? We didn't remove the old city. We left it there. Think about that. Instead of tearing down buildings, we buried them. We paved over sidewalks, left windows staring into darkness, and built new front doors on what used to be the second floor. You can still see the signs. A building with stairs that go nowhere, a doorway half buried in the sidewalk, iron bars and basement windows beneath your feet. These aren't design flaws, they're leftovers, traces of what came before. In places like Seattle, entire streets from the 1800s still exist underground, sealed in silence, one story down. In St. Louis, you can walk past windows from the 1850s, now sitting just inches above the dirt. In Chicago, you'll find old sidewalks beneath modern ones. And in Butte, Montana, entire neighborhoods were buried in mine waste and left there forever. This isn't just about history, it's about memory. It's about the choice to cover the past instead of facing it. When something became too broken, too inconvenient, or too uncomfortable, we buried it and we built something else on top. But here's the truth. What you bury never stays quiet. Because these old cities didn't fall apart, they were frozen. Preserved, locked beneath new streets, still holding onto their walls, their windows, their names. And if you look close enough, the present will show you where the past is still breathing. But some cities didn't just bury streets or buildings. They buried entire downtowns. And in the next place we're going, the old city didn't die in ruins. It's still there, one floor down, almost untouched, and nobody walking above has any idea. If you've ever walked through Pioneer Square in Seattle, you'd never guess that just below your feet lies an entire city, not ruins, not rubble, but full sidewalks, doorways, and old storefronts, still standing, still hidden. In 1889, Seattle was hit by a devastating fire that burned 25 blocks of its downtown. The destruction was massive, but instead of rebuilding exactly where it stood, city leaders decided to make a drastic change. Seattle had always been muddy and flood-prone. Its plumbing was a mess, and the tides often brought sewage right back into homes. So the solution was to raise the streets, literally, one full story higher. Workers began building elevated sidewalks and roadways, using stone, brick, and retaining walls. But instead of tearing out the old streets, they just left them. The buildings remained, with their original entrances now sitting one floor beneath the new city. For a short time, both levels were used. Shopkeepers still opened doors down below, while new streets were being built above their heads. Eventually, the upper level took over, and the lower one was sealed. Today, that forgotten world is called the Seattle Underground, and it still exists. You can take a tour through the old sidewalks. You'll see dusty glass windows, rusted metal poles, brick corridors, and staircases that once led into busy stores, now going nowhere. Time didn't destroy these places, we just stopped using them, and yet they still sit quietly beneath the noise. St. Louis tells a different version of the same story. In the mid-1800s, St. Louis was growing fast, but the streets were a mess. Mud, garbage, and disease were everywhere. Flooding from the Mississippi made it worse. The answer? Instead of cleaning the city, they raised the roads. Tons of gravel and debris were dumped onto the old streets, lifting the city above its problems. But again, the buildings didn't move. They stayed exactly where they were. What used to be the first floor became the basement. Doors and windows were buried. Staircases were extended to reach the new street level. And underneath it all, the old St. Louis remained. Forgotten, but still holding its shape. Even now, you can spot the evidence. Walk through certain alleyways or construction zones and you'll see arched windows just above the dirt line. You'll find metal doors buried in sidewalks, basements that used to be full shops, now sealed and dark. Both cities chose the same path. Don't fix it, just build over it. They buried their problems, and the past didn't complain, it just stayed. The strange part is how easy it is to forget, how quickly we walk over these places without even realizing what we're standing on. In both Seattle and St. Louis, the streets above look modern, clean, sharp, but they're not fresh. They're built on top of memory, pressed down by time, but never erased. The old cities are still there. They still have windows, they still have air. They're just waiting, just below the noise, for someone to look down. But while Seattle and St. Louis were buried in layers of fire and flood, other cities were buried under something much heavier. In some places, what's beneath the surface wasn't abandoned by nature, it was buried by human hands, and no one was supposed to find it again. Chicago doesn't just sit on top of its past, it was literally lifted above it. In the 1850s, the city faced a serious problem. It was built on swampy ground, barely above Lake Michigan, and every time it rained, the streets turned into rivers of sewage and disease. The city was drowning in its own waste. But instead of abandoning the location, Chicago engineers came up with a wild idea: raise the entire city. And they meant it literally. They started by jacking up buildings, one at a time, brick by brick. Thousands of workers used massive screw jacks to slowly lift entire structures, sometimes up to 10 feet in the air. Hotels, shops, even entire rows of buildings were raised, while people continued working inside them. It was one of the most incredible engineering efforts of the 19th century. Then came the streets. Dirt and stone were poured in to match the new height. Sidewalks were rebuilt, new sewer lines were laid, and just like that, the old ground was forgotten.
What used to be street level was now basement. What was once the front door now opened to concrete walls. But parts of that old Chicago are still there. If you walk along Lower Wacker Drive or wander through the underground layers of downtown, you'll find entire sections of the city that operate on a second level, the one most people never see. Hidden tunnels, old staircases, sealed entryways. They're all signs of the earlier Chicago, still sitting just below.
In Butte, Montana, the story is more tragic. Once known as the richest hill on earth, Butte thrived on copper mining. But the success came at a price. As the mines expanded, the city above was slowly consumed. Entire neighborhoods were abandoned so that companies could dig deeper over the empty homes, until they were buried completely. By the mid-1900s, Butte had lost its heart. Historic homes, churches, schools, all disappeared under layers of mining debris. Today, some of those places still lie beneath hills of stone, and in parts of town, you can still feel it, the weight of what's underneath. Streets that once held life now echo with silence, covered in rock, erased from maps. And then there's San Francisco, a city with secrets under the waves. After the 1906 earthquake and fire, much of the city was in ruins. But instead of rebuilding over the exact same land, developers decided to push into the bay. They dumped rubble from the quake, along with sand, garbage, and old ships to create new land, especially in areas like the Marina District. But not everything was removed before this happened. In some places, old buildings were left standing and simply filled in. Over time, these underwater foundations became part of the city's new ground. Today, basements and brick walls remain below what is now prime real estate. And during large earthquakes, those areas shake harder than anywhere else, as if the ghosts of what was buried still try to break the surface. What connects all three of these cities is the quiet decision to cover the past. Not honor it, not study it, just bury it and move on. And somehow, every time, the buried place survives. Not in memory, in stone, in glass, in rooms still standing under new roads. But some cities didn't just bury buildings, they buried identity. In the next places we visit, you'll see how America didn't just pave over history, it paved over people. And what lies below isn't forgotten architecture, it's erased the community. Part 4. Philadelphia, Boston, and New Orleans. When cities bury communities. In Philadelphia, the past doesn't just sit below the streets. It's trapped between the cracks. If you walk through parts of Old City or Society Hill, you'll see modern townhomes and polished roads. But look closer and you'll find odd seams in the sidewalks, curved bricks in strange places, doors that open into earth. That's because Philadelphia has built itself layer upon layer, especially since the 1600s. Roads were raised, old alleys buried, and neighborhoods neighborhoods rebuilt without fully removing what came before. Beneath some of these newer streets, entire colonial-era foundations remain, even full burial grounds. In fact, while building the Liberty Bell Center in 2003, workers discovered over 1,000 unmarked graves beneath what people had believed was just open land. And they weren't just old, they were African American, enslaved and free people who'd been erased from history, paved over for convenience. Philadelphia didn't just build over its streets, it built over its silence. Boston holds a similar story, but here it's in the very shape of the land. The Boston we know today, it was a hilly peninsula with 3 major peaks, but as the city grew in the 1800s, those hills were chopped down. The dirt was carried and dumped into the harbor to fill tidal flats, creating new neighborhoods like Back Bay and South End. It sounds like engineering progress, but what was lost in the process was more than land. Entire communities, Irish, Jewish, Black, were pushed out as their neighborhoods became undesirable. Their homes were bought up, flattened, or simply buried under infill and replaced with modern buildings. The city didn't preserve them. It redesigned them, and today those communities are rarely mentioned in the story of Boston's rise, but the earth hasn't forgotten. In some places, street names don't match the maps. Buildings sit at odd angles, and archaeologists still find layers of brick, cobblestone, and belongings from families who were told their homes didn't matter. Then comes New Orleans, a city built on water, soaked in secrets. New Orleans is one of the few American cities where people know there's something underfoot, and they fear it. Built below sea level, the city has always struggled with flooding, disease, and the dead. That's why most cemeteries there are above ground. The soil is too unstable for burials. But that same instability meant the city often paved over old settlements just to stay standing. After major floods like the one in 1927 or Hurricane Betsy in 1965, entire blocks were wiped out. Rather than rebuild carefully, parts of the city were simply filled in and forgotten. Some Black neighborhoods were covered with freeway ramps. Others became public parks. And in some areas, like the lower Ninth Ward, people returned only to find that what had been lost, homes, history, hope, had never been acknowledged. You don't need to dig deep to find the truth in New Orleans. You just need to listen to the ground. It tells you where the water still rises, where the graves float, where the streets suddenly drop by 2 feet because they were never meant to be there. These cities didn't just bury old bricks, they buried memories. They erased the idea that something had once mattered here. But what if you could uncover those layers? What if we stopped walking over the past and started digging down into it? Because in the final cities we're about to visit, New York and Detroit, the story gets even darker. Entire neighborhoods were buried not by accident, but by policy. And what lies beneath may never be recovered. Part 5. New York and Detroit, the cities that buried themselves. New York is a city that constantly reinvents itself, but every reinvention leaves something behind. In Lower Manhattan, buried beneath layers of steel and glass, are pieces of a city that most people don't even know existed. When workers were excavating for new buildings near Wall Street in the 1990s, they uncovered something unexpected: the African burial ground. Over 400 coffins, men, women, and children, enslaved Africans who lived and died in 17th and 18th century New York, forgotten by history, built over by office towers. The discovery shook the city, not because the burial ground was hidden, but because it had been deliberately erased, covered by landfill, ignored in planning documents, and overwritten by modern maps. The official story of New York had left out entire communities and buried them under concrete. But the burial didn't stop with cemeteries. Look deeper into the city's grid and you'll find dozens of lost neighborhoods, places where immigrants once thrived, where poor communities built their lives only to be removed when it was no longer convenient. In the 1950s and 60s, entire blocks in the Bronx and Lower East Side were leveled for urban renewal. Housing projects and highways rose up, but beneath them, streets that still exist in old maps, homes that were never properly demolished, foundations left behind. New York didn't run out of space, it just chose to replace what it didn't value. The city we see today is perched on a network of ghosts, not in a spooky sense, but in the real physical remains of a forgotten city. And then there's Detroit. Once the beating heart of American industry, Detroit boomed in the early 20th century with auto factories, jobs, and music. But behind the headlines of progress, decisions were being made that would bury entire communities. The city's Black neighborhoods were vibrant, full of families, culture, and history, but they were also targeted. Entire blocks were labeled as blighted, not because of real decay, but because of who lived there. And so homes were bought out, bulldozed, and buried in the name of highways, stadiums. In the case of Black Bottom and Paradise Valley, two of Detroit's most historic Black neighborhoods, everything was erased, not rebuilt, not remembered, just covered. Today, the roads curve through what once were homes. Parking lots stretch across land that once held stories, and when rain hits just right, you can still see outlines of the old streets beneath the surface. Detroit didn't lose its past. It was forced to leave it behind. These cities, New York and Detroit, didn't bury buildings. They buried people. They buried stories. And in doing so, they changed the shape of memory. But what makes this story even more haunting is that these buried cities never left. They're still there, in the brick below your feet, in the door half buried buried in a sidewalk, in the stairs that lead nowhere. What we think of as modern America is, in many places, just a mask built over a forgotten layer. And every now and then, it cracks. Because history doesn't disappear when you build over it, it waits. And one day, it digs its way back up. If this story made you think differently about the place you live, you're not alone. Hit the like button if the idea of buried cities gives you chills, and subscribe to the channel if you want more true stories like this, the kind that dig into real history hiding in plain sight. There's always another layer, another city, another secret, and next time we're going even deeper.